What happens when a guy from the city accidentally contacts a guy from the country? It's not what you think. They strike up a conversation and same difference is created. JD and Corey talk the whole gamut of life as they each see it through the prism of race. One is a 6'4" black man, and one is a 5'4" white man. Tune in and find out which is which. Agree or disagree, they will make you think, strike emotional chords, and more. Stick around. You might just learn something. Welcome to Same Difference with your hosts, JD and Corey. We're sharing our stories and how our stories impacted our approach to life. We take our perspectives into having dialogue about real life topics. Welcome back, listeners, friends. It is time for episode 4, More Representation. I am one of your co-hosts, Corey May, and this is my tag team partner,
JD Mass, and this is Same Difference Podcast.
Yes, sir. Doctor, it's been a little while since we've spoken.
Yes,
It feels like just a few minutes.
it does. And last time we talked, it was about representation, and you gave us that great story that led into an in-depth conversation that I think both of us have talked about. We can continue talking about using some more of our history, just what we witnessed in culture around the topic of representation and how not only the representation itself, but the of the products or the talent, but also the representation in the controls and the ownerships and the benefit of and that side of things. So let's dig in.
Yes, before we get too deep into this, I want to say thank you for you telling your story as well, because your Hidden Figures story makes a big point. Because once you start to see representation as a value, it's hard not to see it. And it's also tiresome and maddening when you see its absence.
Right. And thank you to segregation, most of us in this white world side of things, we don't know that we're not seeing other people's representation equally. We don't know that you're not seeing your own level of representation because we only see our world and it makes sense to us. And
Right.
so we're hidden from it. And we don't get taught about other cultures. Every other culture has to learn something about us because they have to know how to operate in our world. And we don't have to learn about other cultures, nor do we get to learn much about them. We learn about them, though, through specific, right? I can remember learning about slavery, but from this is what white people did, and this is how white people got it, helped remove it, and all of these things. I never learned about India, never learned about China, never learned about Vietnamese, never learned about South America, other than to identify it on the map and remember it for the quiz. We didn't even get to learn about, let alone see representation of it. So it almost becomes hard to see sometimes, even when the representation starts to equalize. We go, hold on, why is there so many?
Yes.
Now they're coming for us. Now they're
Right.
trying to take us. And that becomes like threatening to us when if we really still looked at it, like, nah, most of the news people are white. Most of the stories we see, most of the hosts, most of the bankers, most of the this, most of the, and we all of a sudden don't even recognize how much we're seeing still of our own selves.
Correct. So we can show this. Remember, though, that representation is also about paying bills. There's a money side to representation that has to be identified and also acknowledged.
Yeah.
We can do this on the macro scale and we can do it on the micro scale. I didn't get a chance to see Soul Train in Iowa City until I was older. Usually it was just American Bandstand. And we got to hear whatever was hot on the equivalent of the American top 40s. Thanks, Dick Clark. And Dick Clark did a lot in terms of music in and of itself. But we often forget about Don Cornelius and how Soul Train was an influence. I'm almost positive that you saw Soul Train in where are you at? You in
St.
University
Louis,
City?
U City.
Oh, okay. Just making sure because I keep thinking about how important U City is. Huh.
Greatest place on earth.
Oh my goodness. I'm gonna have to make a pilgrimage down there.
You will have to.
So were you aware of American Bandstand and also Soul Train?
I had heard about American Bandstand. I knew that it was on TV. Because my parents weren't really into watching a lot of TV, my experience of watching TV was with my friends and or my babysitters who were my friends' aunts. And so I got to see. Now, one of the things that I saw a lot of was Star Search. Ed McMahon, loved me some Ed McMahon. Right.
You are correct, sir. Ho,
Yes.
ho, ho.
And it freaked me out when I was old enough to see him on Johnny Carson. I was like, "Wait a second, what's Ed McMahon doing on Johnny Carson?" I only knew him as the Star Search guy because that
Oh,
was where I could, watch TV at at
yeah.
that level and stay up to that level. So, but my cultural experience on TV was more from my friends and their family. And from my parents' standpoint of watching TV, it was news and it was sports and movies, right? We watched
Yeah.
movies.
So, when you were talking about movies and also sports, your parents grew up in St. Louis. Were they big fans of the Cardinals and the Cardinals for baseball, the Cardinals for football?
Football. Yeah.
Were they hockey fans for the Blues as well?
No,
And the
no,
St. Louis Hawks had been long gone.
long gone. I did hear stories about them. And because I was born in Philly and my dad spent enough time there during the Dr. J era,
Mm,
he was a Sixers fan when I was growing up, and I stayed a Sixers fan because they went from, you know, Julius Irving to Barkley to Iverson
mm.
to, so I had no reason not to continue to love my 76ers.
Oh, I was a 76ers fan too. I loved the Sixers. My
Really?
Sixers were my East Coast team and my Lakers were my West Coast team. I had to have an Eastern Conference team and a Western Conference team. I couldn't stand the Boston Celtics.
Hated the Boston Celtics. Let me
Oh,
tell you how gut wrenching this is for me now. I know Jason Tatum's parents. His mom went to U City. He grew up in U City.
yes, yes, he did.
His dad went to St. Louis U with me. Well, both of them did. And I used to play his dad in ping pong and we would hang out around the Black Student Alliance,
Right.
in the cafeteria area and whatnot. He is a Boston Celtic.
I
It
know.
turns my stomach to want to see him do well as a Boston Celtic. I despise that team so much.
So the what we're hitting on here is I loved in terms of representation. Dr. J was iconic. I used to watch the stuffing out of him, trying to imitate those moves and and dunking like he could, and all of that. They were the bridesmaid to Boston's bride for a number of years until they won that chip. And I cheered for that squad because I loved I loved the Sixers. I loved them when I was a little kid.
You know what's interesting about hating the Boston Celtics? Two things. One, Larry Bird was sort of that great white hope
Right.
as the 80s was really showing where this black players were taking over kind of thing.
Mhm.
But also, have you ever listened to Isaiah Thomas speak in interviews about him growing up? They were a
Oh,
Boston Celtics fan.
yes,
His
that's right.
parents raised him to be very conscious of race and culture and purposely were Boston Celtics fans because of how Red Auerbach treated Bill Russell. Not Boston the town fans,
But
but
yeah,
Boston Celtics fans.
and
And
Boston was the first franchise to draft a black player.
yes,
And so I my yes,
me
go ahead.
learning that turned my stomach even more. Like, damn, they were good people.
Right. I had much the same reaction about Larry Bird when I was younger. When I was younger, I couldn't stand Larry Bird. I was like, "Man, he a buster, man." And then there was this time probably when I was 24, I stopped being a Boston hater, and it might have been the fact that he was on the dream team, but I realized that Bird was a bad man. Bird could
Bird's a
just flat
bad
out
man.
ball. Bird could ball. And my own prejudices were getting in the way of seeing him for the ability that he had to play. And watching him on that squad, when Magic would be dishing out those dimes and Larry would just be sniping, like, this is what I do. You better come on out here and get some. As
Mhm.
I've gotten older, I've gone back and watched more of the game that he played,
Yeah.
and my respect has gone up.
Uh,
So all I can say is I love the rivalry between my Lakers and the Celtics. And as we talk about this, I'm pretty sure we can get into this one in the future. The NBA is at its best when you have a strong Boston and you have a strong LA. You can have other squads that are vying for those championships. You can have a Chicago, you can have a Miami, you can have a San Antonio, but you need, in order to have that full country involvement, LA has got to be good and Boston has got to be good. And then you've got your coastal rivalry and you've got your oh boy, I'm going to use some big words now. That dichotomy, because at the end of the season, if your team isn't there, you're going to be for LA or you're going to be for Boston. That's the big split. That's the bifurcation. You're going to be for one or the other because those are the iconic franchises. All right, all right. Now let's back up because full well we're gonna get on sports and we'll stay talking for sports forever. Tell me about your parents' experience, or as you experienced St. Louis sports through the prism of your life experience as well as your parents. Because your parents had to have told you the stories, and then you were in a title town for a number of years.
Oh, sure. I got to hear about Bob Gibson, and I got to hear about Lou Brock, Stan Musial, and it was it was something that I recognized early on, that even white folks that had racist feelings towards integration, towards black excellence in other fields, they didn't see as much of a difference between Stan Musial and Bob Gibson and Lou Brock as they did between the white banker and the black banker, or the, you know what I mean? Like, in the context of sports, we were much more accepting of talent than in other aspects of the world. And I saw that quickly because I was able to see other racist things, and yet also see these people talk about sports like, hey, I want that guy on my team because he's talented, not caring that he's a black man.
You tell me about that. Is there a specific memory that you have where that whole thing becomes crystal clear, where the race was not as important as the talent and what they could bring to the Cardinals on
I
the diamond, or the Cardinals on the gridiron?
I think it was really my interaction with my grandfather. My dad's father uh, had season tickets to the football Cardinals,
Mm,
loved football, was, as he would tell it, he was the best in every sport. He used to crack jokes about how he trained all these great athletes to be the best at what they were. But but he and I connected heavily on sports, and he was a hard guy to get along with,
right.
right? And yet I would hear him speak and argue with my father on topics of politics and race and things of that nature. And he would tell me about my black friends and all of these different things. And yet that was the really, like, we would go to the football Cardinals games, and he was excited to root for Roy Green and EJ Jr. and
Mm,
all these Cardinal players that were black. And he didn't care, white, black, or whatever. He wanted to see us win.
right.
And I think that is where I got to really experience a lot of it up close and personal. Now, he, like, he was such a intense guy, and he stood for what he saw was right. Like, he actually, as an attorney, he fought for blacks in black folks involved in construction to get equal pay as
Right.
whites. And he would tell me that as his justification for how he wasn't racist. He would also tell me he had a problem with how many black friends I, had. He it certainly didn't like that I studied African history and at my the Ohio State University experience.
Mm,
Um, he would push it much more from a pro-Jewish standpoint than an anti-black standpoint. But where we could just stop the talk of race was sports.
did that ever feel like it was this brief oasis of just chill? I mean, the
Oh
the
yeah.
the
When
the, the games themselves might be intense, but this
oh
3
yeah,
hours was
between
not.
he and I, for sure. And because I was his oldest grandchild, um, I had a different relationship because I also lived in the same city as him in St. Louis, where his other grandchildren lived in Kansas City and Boston. I got to experience him regularly. And when he would ask me what I want to do, I would choose anything sports related. When he would get so upset with me about things, right? I didn't go to synagogue during the high holidays. I didn't really, I wasn't enthused about it at different times. And he would get enraged. He would pause. What do you think the Rams are going to do this season?
Mm.
And we would go into sports. Like we both used it not to talk about crap we would be disagreeing with. But it was, it was interesting. Like he could talk genuinely about white and black players, and so would other people. I mean, that was what spurned my thought to really answer your question and where I saw it,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
made me see it in other people that from a talent standpoint, we could accept black talent. So
Oh,
threatened by it in our entertainment side of things, but not in our workspace, not in our community, not
well,
in our,
this sounds like a different, like another definition of representation, because you're talking about the sports teams and how they're representing St. Louis or that part of Missouri, even what is that, Western Illinois, Southwestern Illinois too.
mhm,
That's the fact that you both were able to bridge that gap over sports. There's a lot to that. Tell me more about how your grandfather, when was with you. So you were there when the Rams had
I was
moved,
there when the Cardinals were there.
and then when the
I
Cardinals moved
mean,
to Phoenix or
he had
Arizona.
he had Cardinals season tickets from the time that they were there. Now, I wasn't born
Right,
or, old enough to go in the
right,
early ages, but in the '80s, I got to experience this team moving that crushed me. I couldn't understand that one bit. What do you mean we don't own the Cardinals as a city? What is this?
right,
So that was definitely. And then when the Rams came, and my grandfather loved him some football. I
right.
mean, would go to their, whatever that preseason
Yeah,
workout and all of that, and loved it, and would tell me who was talented and who was overrated and who was that, and he just was into it, and it was never, you know, hmm. Even in, for instance, Kurt Warner, he knew Kurt Warner was going to be a bad mamma jamma before Kurt Warner was known to anybody else in the world. He
right,
was screaming when they went and got Trent Green. He was screaming at me. I don't know what the hell they're doing. They got this Kurt Warner kid. I saw him play. He's going to be great, and they won't even give him a chance. What the heck is wrong with him? But Tony Banks was the quarterback at the
right,
time
right. I remember
before
Tony
that,
Banks from
right?
Michigan State.
And Tony Banks, being one of the first black quarterbacks now compared to how many we have now, my grandfather never spoke about Tony Banks as a black quarterback, as an athlete, and not smart, and all of these other kind of, things that all he knew was Tony Banks wasn't qualified to lead us to greatness. Kurt Warner was.
Right, right,
And
right,
and even though he was speaking of a white man being better than a black man, I never got the sense, and my radar was up by this point. I never got the sense that there was anything race related to do with this. He just wanted what was best for his team.
oh, that's powerful. Now, here's the corollary to that. Kurt Warner is from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which is just 30 miles up the road, if that.
Right,
And then he went to the University of Northern Iowa, which is about 90 minutes north of here. He couldn't get on here at the University of Iowa. Our coach Hayden Fry did not recruit him.
right.
And then Warner gets on up there and at UNI after having done night stalking at shelf stalking at a Hy-Vee, which is a grocery store. Y'all have Hy-Vees in down there by St. Louis?
Nope. I only really know of them from driving through the country, and
Oh, through the country. Oh,
yeah,
Lord have mercy. I take it that was a shot. I take it that was a shot.
something like that.
Uh, well, Warner is emblematic of the the local boy done good, the conservative dream of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and all that. The dogged determination, the deep abiding faith, and this is what happens. I respect that. I would say that again. I'll just say I respect that. Tell me more about the those moments with your granddad. What did your granddad think about Ozzie Smith?
So there was a another guy way back in the day that apparently was a really good shortstop, and I can't remember his name for the Cardinals. And I mean, like, this was before my father's time. Um, that my grandfather was a big fan of too, and he would compare him to Ozzie Smith. I personally felt like Ozzy was my personal entertainer. He he put on his best shows when I went to the ball game. I saw some of the greatest moments of his career live, and I can't tell you. Um, the only autograph I've ever gotten that I've ever loved is that of Ozzie Smith. All the other ones that I love all say pay to the order of Jesse Mass, and then the autograph is at the bottom.
I
But
get it.
I never cared about an autograph. My parents brought me a Ted Simmons signed dollar. It went into an arcade machine. I'm sad to say. Um, I didn't care about that, but Ozzy was something different, and he was different for St. Louis. It's interesting because Ozzy grew up in Watts, right? And if you're from St. Louis, you wouldn't know nothing about how he grew up because he kind of maintained this even keel about race, and he went in and he was loved by them white folks, and almost a little too much if I at times, but he just kind of maintained. He didn't pretend to be anything different than he was. And I don't know that he would have gotten much out of trying to be different in St. Louis, but he was very welcomed by the white folks, and because of that, he almost had this sort of Michael Jordan kind of stance on life. And I don't even know if I could say stance. It's almost like he didn't take one as much. He was certainly black kids' heroes, right? Like Nelly was a fantastic athlete, and did the Ozzie Smith backflip and all of that. And so seeing them for my friends, he was something to look up to, live up to, try to emulate. All of us were trying to dive for balls. Like he made that something that became much more of a norm, and it was phenomenal when he was doing it.
Right.
And so that my grandfather with Ozzy, I mean, he loved them. He did used to try and tell me that there was somebody just as good, and because they had smaller gloves back then, blah 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 blah. Um, but yeah, Ozzy was one of a kind for us in St. Louis. I don't know that there was, until Albert Pujols came along, there wasn't a more beloved sports figure during my era.
So, yes, as we're dealing with the issues of representation, do you think it was a function of the times that Ozzy had to maintain that even keel?
I'm certain if you look at that era across the board, that's the 80s.
Yes.
It is when I want to say Ozzy was the first athlete to make $1 million a year, if not first baseball player. He was the first of something at $1 million a contract. I'm sure you can Google it right now faster than I can figure it out, but I remember something to that nature. And this was a time when black athletes were starting to get uh, more and more money. I mean, like that was the launch of really the bigger dollars in comparison to what they made back in the day. And so I would say yes. I think that it kind of was as they were trend setting into making money and getting endorsement deals and all of these other things, that there was this sort of built-in, going back to the power to define, need to assimilate more in order to be rewarded.
Right. Wow. I would imagine that that probably took a tremendous toll, not being able to feel comfortable or not feeling comfortable enough to fully express your feelings in the same way that your white peers may be able to express themselves. That might be painful.
Yeah. So what sports teams, I mean, you followed college sports more than pros, or how did that work?
All right. So living in Iowa, I'm 5 hours from almost everything, right?
Right.
So Minnesota, the Vikings, 5 hours away. Green Bay, 5.5, maybe 6 hours away. St. Louis, 4 hours away. Um, Indianapolis, 5.5 hours away. Chicago, 4 hours away. So I had my Kansas City 4 hours away. So I've got my choice of teams that I can watch. And I was at one time a Vikings fan because I thought Alan Page was so cool. And that Purple People Eater defense was phenomenal. Walter Payton shows up in the 70s for the Bears, and I have cousins in Chicago who paid attention to the Bears. Green Bay at the time was not very good. I mean, the Bart Starr era had long since passed. They hadn't drafted Favre yet. Kansas City was okay. I don't recall much about St. Louis. So it seemed to me like it was going to be the NFC Central that I was
Central.
paying more attention to. And yeah, the upper part of that, Bears and Vikings were more of what I was paying attention to. And then I had this weird outlier because my um, parents had gotten me Raider pajamas, and I I was starting to pay attention to them. And when they drafted Marcus Allen back in 1982, I was fascinated. I was absolutely positively fascinated about this guy who was averaging more than 200 yards per game in college and was the first to go over 2,000 yards in one season. Oh, paid attention. Paid attention. The Hawkeyes were in my backyard, and prior to 1980, there had been decades when we were one of the worst football programs in a college football. I would get free tickets to go to the games through the Des Moines Register. I was a paper boy there, and if you sold enough and you collected enough, uh, and in a timely fashion, you could get these knot hole tickets that were a couple of bucks. You could sit and watch the games, which wasn't much fun because we would usually lose until Hayden Fry came. Hayden Fry comes in 1979, and I remember it pretty vividly because it's the year after my dad has died. I'm 12 years old. Dad dies in the fall of 78. Coach Fry hits the field in 79 and we go 5-6 our first year under him, and there's hope here. By 1981, we've qualified for the Rose Bowl, which was at that time the champion of the Big Ten going against the champion of the Pac 10
Right.
as well. We went out there, we got clobbered. What was also happening, though, was as I'm maturing and getting into 13, 14 years old, I can go play basketball at the field house, which was a facility on campus. And for pickup games, it was iconic throughout the Midwest where you could go and find a great game of basketball at the field house. When you would play over at the field house, you would also run into the college athletes. The women's basketball players would play over there sometimes. The men's basketball players would mess around and play over there. Football players would play over there, and you would get to know them casually. It became these folks that you might see once a week were actually real people that you got to know, and while they might be older, they might recognize you. There, I have a story about a basketball player named Vince Brookins, and I think this guy is. I thank him every time I see him. He doesn't remember this. The last time I saw him, I reminded him of this story. I was a 13 or 14-year-old kid, and he had played at the University of Iowa. He wears a size 15 shoe. I wear a size 15 shoe, and he gave me 2 pairs of basketball shoes. And no, he gave me 3 pairs of basketball shoes. And I got to tell you, it was the kindest thing that he ever did. I mean, I'm sure he's done hundreds and thousands of kind things, but to me, it was the kindest thing that he had ever done because he directly affected me. And to see him as a fully fleshed out human being who gave me some, he didn't have to give me shoes, but he asked me, well, so kid, what size shoe is your foot? And I said, I wear a size 15. He's like, come here. And he gave me 3 pairs of shoes, a pair of Adidas, a pair of Converse, and a pair of Nikes. I thought that was amazing. And that was in the early 80s. Man, talk about representation, that somebody understood you and understood that there was this kid who was the son of a widow who had big feet and that you're going to help out without really asking. Wow, huge. So at that point, they move from these distant stars in a constellation that you watch once or twice a week and you might see on campus and you might be like, oh my gosh, to somebody that you can say hello and thank you to. When I told him that story a couple years ago, it was 3, 4 years ago, pre-pandemic, he didn't remember it at all. But he said, thank you for telling me that. It's nice to know that I was kind. A moment. That's an absolute moment. As I grew up, these and as my ages started to match the athletes, then you saw them in class and they were just people.
Right.
And people of color on a predominantly white campus are there for a lot of times they're there for the athletics, sometimes they're there for the education, but you acknowledge each other because when you would see them across campus, you'd do the nod and then you'd get the nod back, or you might see them clubbing downtown and you might dap them up, but it was just general principle. I'm acknowledging you. I see you representing our campus, and I see you representing me. So I'm not going to do anything to be disrespectful. I have no reason or rhyme to be disrespectful to anyone in any way, shape, or form about this. There's no point. And it's amazing. We can even jump another generation. My eldest son, Xavier, he's now in his later 20s. Well, because he was here and he was playing quarterback, he got a chance to meet uh, Heisman runner up Brad Banks, and he maintained a friendship with him, attending his sports camp. I have one of his Legends of Iowa t shirts, and then Xavier has an autographed football helmet, and he keeps that to this day. And I don't know how recently that they've been in communication, but Xavier told me at one time that they stayed in touch. And that's meaningful because, again, my son was a quarterback, and seeing a quarterback that looked like him was important.
Right.
That's another story to share.
Right. And especially around that quarterback.
Oh, yeah, yeah. The beautiful thing is, we know that the game of football could have taken that quantum leap forward 30, 40 years ago,
Years ago.
because there were qualified black quarterbacks who could have handled those schemes. But for whatever reason, profit motive, I wouldn't think that it would be profit motive, stubbornness, and an unwillingness to integrate out consistently, we've missed out on some of the best aspects of this.
Right.
And that conversion of quarterbacks who played quarterback in junior high, high school, and even in college, missing that opportunity, we don't know what could have been.
Yes.
That is one of those stinging moments that here we are in the late 20th century. At that time, we were still arguing about the capacity of black athletes to play the quarterback position. That's mind-boggling to me. And now all of the sudden, you've got a Patrick Mahomes. It shouldn't be all of the sudden. He's standing on the shoulders of Doug Williams. I mean, heck, you remember when Doug Williams in the late 80s played for the Washington
Washington.
Redskins.
Yeah.
And a quarter no a reporter asked him this question, and it still comes up. So how long have you been a black quarterback?
Yeah.
Come on. Come on. That shouldn't have been there. That was a lack of preparation. Now, I'm not trying to pillory this person, not by any stretch of the imagination, but you mean to tell me that you don't have a better question to ask than that? That's a hard question. You wouldn't ask that to a white quarterback. How long have you been a white quarterback?
And
No.
that is such a position of power versus a position, where the culture is built for you. You felt comfortable and noticing this attribute that you shaped your question in that way
Right.
without without consciously saying, how should I ask him about being a quarterback?
Right. Right. Well, I mean, even to the degree that we are having some of these similar conversations about uh, black head coaches. And I'm not sure. I mean, the doors should have been blown off when Tony Dungy won a championship. The doors should have blown off and said people should He's saying, wow, we've got tons of talent here. This person's race should not be a primary question. It should be, can he get the job done? And we
The
can look at his body of work. I'm speaking about Eric Bieniemy right now, who's been through 14 or so head coaching interviews and has still not gotten a gig. And there are people who have far thinner, there are white males who have far thinner resumes who've gotten head coaching positions over him or ahead of him, rather. I shouldn't say over because I don't know whether they were specifically in the same race for a or the same campaign, if you will, for a head coaching position.
well, I'll take it further, going back to them beloved Boston Celtics.
Mm-hmm.
One, Bill Russell was a coach,
Yeah, player
and
coach. Yeah, yeah.
Casey Jones
Right.
was the coach of their championship teams.
Right.
So,
I have I don't think my problem is with the Celtics in and of itself now that I am matured.
yeah,
I have a problem with the Boston history, the city of Boston's history with regard to race relations, I guess. And when
yeah,
I was younger, I don't think I was sophisticated enough to nuance that out. It was Celtics bad. Urgh.
right.
And I don't believe that I had gained the maturity to split the Celtics organization with from the city of Boston itself.
Well, I know I didn't, and they were some talented ass white boys between
Oh,
Danny Ainge and Kevin McHale and Larry Bird and right, like
you're not wrong.
mm,
Kevin McHale's footwork in the post was insane. That up and under move of his was phenomenal.
right,
He might look like Herman Munster, but that cat could play. That cat could ball. And the fact that he was fundamentally sound, kept the ball up high. Uh, I watched his footwork time and time again, and I just he was a killer. He was an absolute killer. I throw mad respect to that Celtics club. Mad respect at them,
yeah.
and just the rivalry that they created with LA made money for the NBA, and it created the formative years of of everything that comes forward. That rivalry, building that rivalry. Um, you had it going. You had it previously in the '60s, but this,
Well, their two biggest rivals
right?
were the two teams that Wilt Chamberlain played on against,
Mm-hmm.
right, the Sixers and the Lakers
Right, right,
against Bill Russell.
right. And I wonder what my perception would have been about Boston. And again, I'm admitting my own flaws and frailty here. If Bird had been white, or what would have happened if Magic had gone to Boston and Bird had gone to LA?
Hmm.
I don't know. My head
Right.
would have probably exploded. I don't know what I would have done as a kid. Now, uh, as a sports fan, this is, I know we can talk forever on this, but this is more than just simply sports. This is also our own prejudices and our own sociology kind of being uncovered and peeled back like layers of an onion here.
Without a doubt.
I think these kinds of conversations are important and very significant because there's so much race couched in sports.
And I would frame it slightly different. There's so much opportunity for uncovering and healing race outside of sports. There's so much race in our society,
Right.
right? And sports plays this great opportunity for healing, and then often it just is an opportunity to sort of ignore that and be human.
Right. So, wow, you're hitting on something that's huge right here. I think we're going to probably sometime this football season discuss the value of college sports. And one game that I want to frame up before we get there, and I think it's important, is the Army Navy game. I don't know whether you ever were whether was a tradition in your household to watch that game or not. We can talk about that one for hours then. If it wasn't there, I'll talk all hour for that.
Well, then we'll have to touch base on it.
This is there's a lot to unpack here in terms of the role that sports plays in American society, and then overlaid on top of that is the role that race plays in American society. And when we've
Yeah,
got that confluence of those two, there's so much to deal with. We talked a lot about Boston. We haven't talked that much about LA. And at some point, we'll have to have that conversation about the Lakers and their perception, and then why it mattered when they clashed.
when Boston and the Lakers clashed.
Yes, when Boston and the Lakers
Oh yeah,
clashed.
without a doubt.
Oh, JD, it's about that time.
It is.
It's about that time. Listeners, we want to thank VPR, Voice of People Radio, and our dear, dear friends, Kiana and DJ FMI,
JFMI.
for giving us the opportunity and the space to speak to you as we are now.
We are truly grateful. We hope that our stories continue to relate and touch, as well as educate and inform. And may we continue to grow and develop. And hopefully, you will help us with your feedback and your even criticism, as well as your encouragement for what we're building here with Same Difference.
Doctor, do you want to tell him the email?
Sure. Same Different Broadcast at gmail.com. Feel free to send in ideas, comments, whatever you're feeling like sharing with us. We welcome it.
We do. And if there's a comment or two that we think needs to be addressed on air, we'll definitely do that. This is a dialogue.
It
It's a
is.
dialogue between us, and it's also a dialogue between us, you and I, or us and our listeners, you as the
Yeah.
listeners. It's important for us to hear what you're thinking, and maybe you've got a story that we should be digging into and bringing that to consciousness.
And we would love to hear it.
Absolutely. My friend, it has been the uh, almost a full hour, and I have to tell you, I'm enjoying this every single time we do it.
Well, likewise. Same Difference has been a great opportunity for us and just an enjoyable part of my life, honestly.
I echo you in those sentiments, my friend. So, doctor,
Yes, sir.
it's about that time. So,
It
what is
is.
this podcast called, and where are you from?
Same Difference. And I am coming from University City, St. Louis, Missouri.
There you go. I am your co-host Corey May, calling in from Iowa City, Iowa. This has been Same Difference. Episode 4, more representation. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
What happens when a guy from the city accidentally contacts a guy from the country? It's not what you think. They strike up a conversation and same difference is created. JD and Corey talk the whole gamut of life as they each see it through the prism of race. One is a 6'4" black man and one is a 5'4" white man. Tune in and find out which is which. Agree or disagree, they will make you think, strike emotional chords, and more. Stick around. You might just learn something. Welcome to Same Difference with your hosts, JD and Corey. We're sharing our stories and how our stories impacted our approach to life. We take our perspectives into having dialogue about real life topics.
Thank you for tuning in to another inspiring episode of Same Difference. We hope this journey through unique connections and diverse perspectives has left you with fresh insights and a broader understanding of the world we share.
We're humbled by your support and enthusiasm for the incredible stories and discussions we've shared. And remember, our mission is to foster critical thinking, embrace new perspectives, and spark conversations that bring us closer to an equitable world.
So, if you've enjoyed our podcast, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us. Your feedback means the world to us, and it helps us reach even more listeners.
And if you have a story to share or a topic you'd like us to explore, don't hesitate to get in touch. We're always looking for new voices and fresh perspectives to feature on Same Difference.
Until next time, remember that our shared humanity is our most powerful asset, and by working together, we can bring about positive change.
Stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep making a difference. Thank you for being a part of Same Difference.
Take care, everyone. See you in the next episode.